Jamal Carter stood in front of his AP class. Heart pounding, voice steady. "I want to be a trauma surgeon," he said. The room froze. Then his white teacher, Ms. Latham, laughed out loud. 15 years later, inside a trauma bay, he was the only doctor who could save her life. But before he picked up the scalpel, he looked her in the eye. "Do you remember me now?" What happened next shocked the entire hospital. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Lincoln High School wasn't the worst place in the world, but it was the kind of place where futures were quietly judged by zip codes, last names, and how many times a teacher sighed before calling on you. On the third floor, room 207 always smelled faintly of dust and dry erase markers. It was supposed to be where seniors shaped their dreams. But for Jamal Carter, a 17-year-old black student with quiet eyes and perfect attendance, it became the room where his dignity was publicly stripped. Latham, the AP English teacher, was in her mid-50s, wrapped in her usual beige cardigan and floral scarf like armor against change. She had a way of speaking to some students like she was teaching a college seminar, and to others like Jamal like she was scolding a child. Her bun was tight, her words tighter. It was college declaration day. Posters of Ivy Leagues and trade schools lined the back wall. At the front, a red and black banner read, "What's your dream?" Students had been asked to stand up one by one and share their plans after graduation. It was meant to be inspiring. It wasn't. "Carlos," she called. "You're up." "I'm thinking of going into accounting," Carlos said with a shrug. "Smart choice," Miss Latham said warmly. "Numbers don't lie." "Jessica, I got accepted into the pre-law program at Howard." "Excellent. A future attorney, we need more like you." When Jamal's name was called, the room shifted. Some students sat up straighter. Others looked at each other and smirked, already expecting a punchline. He stood slowly, holding his college portfolio in one hand. "I want to become a trauma surgeon," he said, voice even, eyes steady. Silence. It was the kind of silence that was too loud, not respectful, not impressed, just stunned. And then Ms. Latham laughed. It wasn't cruel at first, just short and sharp, but it echoed across the room like a slap. "Oh," she said, hand on her chest like she'd misheard. "You want to be a doctor?" Jamal didn't blink.
"Yes, ma'am."
"A trauma surgeon." Ms. Latham tilted her head, amused. "Well, that's certainly ambitious." Her tone dripped with condescension. "Have you taken AP biology, or are you planning to start with some community college prerequisites?" She said community college, like it was a curse. Students snickered. A few shifted uncomfortably. "I'm already enrolled in dual credit courses at the city college," Jamal said. "Biology and chemistry. I'm getting A's." "Well, sure," she said, brushing off the response. "But medicine is extremely rigorous, Jamal. There's a lot of science involved. Long hours. High pressure. I just hope you're being realistic." Jamal felt heat in his chest. He forced his voice to stay steady. "I know it's hard. I've looked into the requirements. I've been volunteering at the hospital on weekends for over a year." Ms. Latham raised an eyebrow. "Oh, is that so?" He nodded. "MER. I've shadowed the night shift. I know what it takes." The class was silent again. Not because they respected him, but because they didn't know what to say. Ms. Latham finally gave a tight smile. "Well then, I suppose we'll just have to see how far that dream takes you." She turned to the board, ready to move on. But Jamal didn't sit down. "I'm going to make it," he said quietly. "One day you'll remember this conversation, and you'll remember that you laughed." The room froze. No one had ever spoken to Ms. Latham like that. Not rudely, but with quiet certainty. Jamal wasn't angry. He wasn't disrespectful. He was just sure, and that shook something loose. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her jaw tightened. "You can take your seat, Jamal." He nodded once, but instead of sitting down, he picked up his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out of the room. Everyone watched him go. The door clicked shut behind him. No one knew it then, but that moment would ripple for years, far beyond the classroom walls. Outside the classroom, Jamal's footsteps echoed down the hall, but the vow he had just made would echo far louder. And one day he'd have the chance to make her remember every word. The next morning, the halls of Lincoln High felt different. Whispers followed Jamal like shadows. He didn't need to guess what they were about. He could hear the laughter echoing behind him, as clearly as the school bell. The story had spread overnight. Jamal Carter thinks he's going to be a doctor. It wasn't the kind of gossip that faded. It grew. By lunch period, someone had scrawled Dr. Dreamer on his locker in red marker. The word doctor was crossed out and replaced with janitor. Jamal stood there staring at it, his jaw tight. A few students passed by, pretending not to notice. Others didn't bother pretending. "Hey doc," one of the football players called out, his grin wide and cruel. "Got any band-aids for broken dreams?" The cafeteria roared with laughter. Jamal said nothing. He just grabbed his tray and found the corner table he always sat at alone. It wasn't just the students. The teachers noticed too, but their silence was louder than any joke. Ms. Latham hadn't spoken to him since the incident, but every time she handed back essays, his papers seemed to be marked a little harsher, his margins a little redder. "You write well," she'd say, "but you need to focus on realistic themes. These medical career essays are a bit far-fetched, don't you think?" Her words were polite on the surface, but Jamal could feel the sting underneath. Each time she questioned his goals, it chipped away at something inside him. Yet, he refused to stop trying. At home, his mother, Denise Carter, worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria. She came home tired but smiling, her uniform smelling faintly of disinfectant and coffee. When Jamal told her what happened, she listened quietly, her face unreadable. "She laughed at you?" Denise asked. "Yeah. And the kids? They think it's funny." His mother exhaled slowly, staring out the window. "Baby, let them laugh, let them doubt, but don't let them win." Jamal nodded, but her words didn't erase the sting of humiliation. Each morning he walked into school carrying both his backpack and the invisible weight of every whisper. By mid-semester, the small slights became open hostility. His lab partner Ryan stopped showing up during projects. "I can't get paired with you, man," Ryan said once, almost apologetic. "Ms. Latham said she'd rather I work with someone more focused." "Focused," Jamal repeated. "Right." He'd started noticing things going missing from his desk. A textbook, his calculator, a pen set his mom had bought him for good luck. Once he found his biology notes in the trash can, ripped down the middle. And when he reported it, Vice Principal Harris, a graying man who smiled too often, just sighed. "Jamal, sometimes when you stand out, you attract the wrong kind of attention. Best thing you can do is keep your head down, son." Keep his head down. That's what everyone told him. His teachers, the guidance counselor, even a few friends who meant well. But Jamal was tired of keeping his head down. He wanted to lift it up. Still, the pressure built quietly, like a storm waiting for the right spark. One afternoon, in Ms. Latham's advanced science class, Jamal arrived early. The fluorescent lights flickered above, humming faintly. Beakers and microscopes sat neatly arranged across the long tables. He set down his backpack and began preparing for the day's lab on chemical reactions. He double-checked the materials. Careful as always, he'd built a reputation for precision. If he couldn't earn their respect with charm, he'd earn it with excellence. The bell rang. Students filed in. Ms. Latham's heels clicked against the linoleum. "Today," she announced, "we'll be combining reactive agents. Safety first, people." She glanced briefly at Jamal. "And Jamal? Let's be extra careful today, shall we? We wouldn't want an accident." A few students chuckled. Jamal's fists tightened around his notebook, but he said nothing. The class began. Pairs measured chemicals, stirred, recorded data. Jamal worked alone, as usual. Ryan had chosen to join another group. He moved carefully, adding each substance drop by drop, watching the liquid shift colors inside the beaker. It was calming, methodical. For a few minutes he forgot about the laughter, the graffiti, the name, until a loud hiss filled the air. Students gasped. A puff of smoke rose from Jamal's workstation. Ms. Latham spun around, her face pale. "Step back," she shouted. Jamal froze. He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd measured precisely. But before he could speak, a sharp, sulfurous smell filled the room. "Jamal," Ms. Latham barked. "What did you mix?" He glanced at the labels. "The reagents you assigned, ma'am. It shouldn't react like that." Her eyes narrowed. "Unless you weren't paying attention." Everyone out. The class scrambled to the hallway. Jamal stayed back, trying to explain. "It wasn't enough," she snapped. "You could have caused an explosion. It was already like that when I—" "Don't you dare argue with me, young man." Her voice dropped to a dangerous calm. You think you're too smart for everyone. Maybe you should spend some time thinking about the kind of responsibility that comes with that attitude." Minutes later, the principal arrived. The smell had cleared. No damage, no harm. But Ms. Latham's version of events spread faster than the smoke. "Negligence," she said. "Disruption. Endangering classmates." Jamal was suspended by the end of the day. He sat in the principal's office, staring at the disciplinary report. Each word cut deeper than the last. Unsafe behavior. Irresponsible conduct. Defiance. He wanted to scream. To explain that he'd done everything right. That someone must have switched the chemicals. But there was no proof. Just his word against hers. When his mother arrived, she looked tired but fierce. "You wouldn't do something like that," she said firmly. "My son is careful. He volunteers at a hospital. He wants to save lives." But the principal just sighed. "Mrs. Carter, we have to treat all students equally. He'll be allowed to return after 3 days. Let's use this as a learning experience." "A learning experience," she repeated, voice trembling. "For who? For him or for the people who keep trying to break him?" Jamal didn't speak on the way home. He stared out the window as the city passed by in blur, cracked sidewalks, corner stores, the distant siren of an ambulance. His mother finally said softly, "You still want this, right?" After all this, he didn't answer right away. "I don't know anymore," he said quietly. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong in that world." Denise reached over, placing a hand on his knee. "Jamal," she said, her voice low but steady, "people like us aren't supposed to wait for permission. You want to heal people, then you fight for it, even if it breaks you first." He nodded slowly, but the doubt had already taken root. That night, he sat at his desk, staring at his hospital volunteer badge. He picked it up, turned it over, and noticed something strange. There was a faint, greasy residue on his fingers, the kind that came from lab chemicals. He frowned. Someone had touched his bag. Someone had set him up. He looked toward the window, the night air heavy with silence. His reflection stared back, angry, uncertain, and changed. The next morning, Jamal marched back to the science lab, determined to prove his innocence. But what he found on his desk made his blood run cold. Denise Carter wasn't the kind of woman to let her son be buried in silence. Not when she knew the truth. Not when she had scrubbed floors in the same hospital Jamal dreamed of working in. Not after raising him on second-hand textbooks and whispered prayers. The moment she saw her son's spirit flicker in that quiet car ride home, she made up her mind. She was going to war. The next morning, Denise didn't go to work. She didn't clock in at 5 a.m. in the cafeteria kitchen, or wipe down stainless steel counters while humming gospel under her breath. She pulled on her only blazer, navy blue, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and marched into Lincoln High with her spine straight and her chin lifted. The front desk secretary barely looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Denise said. "I'm here to speak with Principal Vaughn." "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm not leaving until I do." It took 45 minutes, 3 phone calls, and 1 stern look before they let her in. Principal Vaughn, a soft-spoken man in a maroon tie, gestured toward the plastic chair across from his desk. "Mrs. Carter, I understand your concerns." "No," she interrupted, folding her hands calmly. "I don't think you do. My son was framed, and instead of investigating that, you suspended him. You let that woman, Ms. Latham, humiliate him, and now you've let her punish him for something he didn't do." He leaned back, sighing. "We followed district policy. The lab incident was not his fault." Denise's voice didn't rise, but it was sharp enough to cut through air. "And this didn't start yesterday. It started the day he stood up and said he wanted to be a doctor. And your teachers decided that was a joke." Vaughn shifted uncomfortably. "There's no formal complaint on record about Ms. Latham. Her evaluations are consistently high." "I don't care about her evaluations," Denise snapped. "I care about the fact that my son, who volunteers at a hospital, who studies hours every night, who stays out of trouble, was treated like a criminal because someone in that room didn't like seeing a black boy aiming too high." The room fell quiet. Vaughn's fingers tapped the desk, his discomfort obvious. "Mrs. Carter, I understand how this feels." "No, you don't," she said. "You don't understand what it's like to send your kid to school every day, knowing he's walking into a fight he didn't start. You don't understand what it's like to see your child shrink under the weight of other people's low expectations." He hesitated. "Even if we revisited the suspension, we'd need evidence." "Then find it," she said coldly. Because if you don't, I will. That afternoon, Denise began pulling threads. She requested every disciplinary report, every teacher's email, every grade update. She called the district office, filed a formal complaint, and demanded a hearing. The process was slow, wrapped in red tape and technical language meant to confuse and exhaust parents like her. But Denise had stamina. She'd spent 18 years raising Jamal on nothing but honesty and hard work. Bureaucracy didn't scare her. What did scare her was how deep the rot went. Jamal's records were riddled with subtle but undeniable patterns. Classes where his grades dipped only after he voiced ambition. Notes from teachers calling him distracted, difficult, or unrealistic. There were even internal comments suggesting he might be better suited to vocational programs. He needs structure, one teacher wrote. He overestimates his potential. When Denise read that line, she had to leave the room. She cried in the hallway for 10 minutes before coming back and reading the rest. She wasn't just up against a teacher. She was up against a culture. One night, after Jamal had gone to bed, she stayed up staring at her laptop. The email thread with the district supervisor had gone cold. No follow-up, no acknowledgement, just automated responses. That's when she decided to take it further. She called the local education advocacy office, run out of a small building on the west side of the city. It was underfunded, short-staffed, and ignored by the school board, but it was run by a woman named Clarissa Monroe, a retired principal who had once made headlines for exposing discrimination at another school. Ms. Monroe, Denise said when they met, "My son is being erased. Quietly. Professionally. I need help stopping it." Clarissa didn't flinch. "Bring me everything. Records, names, emails. I've seen this before. But this time, we'll document every inch." Over the next week, they built a file. A thick, disturbing file. It showed the progression from bright-eyed student to targeted outcast. It included reports from other students, anonymous but honest, who had seen teachers mock Jamal's ambitions or ignore his raised hand in class. And then came the twist. Late one evening, Denise received a call from a blocked number. She almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Carter?" a voice said, hesitant but firm. "This is Aaron Walker. I used to teach Jamal in freshman biology." Denise remembered him. Young, soft-spoken, one of the few black teachers at the school. He'd left Lincoln High 2 years ago under quiet circumstances. "I heard what happened," he continued, "and I think you should know. I left that school because of the same culture your son is up against. I didn't have the power to stop it then, but I kept some notes." "What kind of notes?" she asked. "Emails. Internal messages. A few conversations I documented between Ms. Latham and other staff about Jamal. Things that weren't meant to be written down, but were." Denise's heart slammed in her chest. "You still have them?" "I do, and I think it's time someone used them." The next morning, Aaron met Denise and Clarissa at the advocacy center. He handed over a flash drive. Inside were emails showing clear bias. Ms. Latham mocking Jamal's medical goals in staff chats. Another teacher saying, "He needs to be humbled." And worst of all, an exchange just days before the lab incident, where Ms. Latham warned a colleague, "He's getting cocky. Might be time for a reality check." Denise sat back in her chair, stunned. It wasn't negligence. It was sabotage. They had the smoking gun. Clarissa's voice was calm but electric. "This changes everything." By the end of the week, Denise had requested a formal hearing with the school board. News of the complaint began circulating through the district, and while some dismissed it as a misunderstanding, others started paying attention. Jamal, still suspended, sat at home reading his textbooks in silence. But something had shifted. He could feel it in the way his mother moved. Determined, purposeful. One afternoon, Denise handed him the flash drive. "You need to see this," she said. He plugged it into the computer and began reading. Each line of email, each message, each offhand joke hit like a blow. But there was also power in it. Proof that he wasn't imagining things, that his pain was real, that he wasn't crazy, that he wasn't alone. "They wrote me off before I even had a chance," he whispered. "But they forgot one thing," Denise said, her hand on his shoulder. "You're my son, and you don't go down without a fight." Jamal stared at the screen, the glow reflecting in his eyes. His chest rose and fell with something deeper than rage. It was resolve. That night the file was printed, labeled, and sealed in an envelope marked for the district's legal office. But just as Denise was preparing to send it, her phone buzzed with a text. "Unknown number. Meet me at Lincoln High. Tonight, science lab. 10 p.m. Trust me, it was unsigned. She showed the message to Jamal. You think it's real? She asked. Jamal's eyes narrowed. Only one way to find out. That night, mother and son slipped through the back entrance of the school, and what they found inside the science lab would rewrite everything they thought they knew. The walls of apartment 2C were thin enough to hear your neighbors argue, cry, or dream, depending on the hour. The air was permanently damp, and the ceiling in the corner of Jamal's room had a slow-growing patch of black mold that had outlived 2 landlords and 3 rent hikes. But for Jamal, that room was more than a bedroom. It was a sanctuary, a war room, a place where his dream hadn't been laughed at yet. By day, Jamal walked the halls of Lincoln High with invisible bruises. Every sideways glance, every muttered joke behind his back, every cold shoulder from teachers who had already filed him under statistically unlikely to succeed. But by night, under a flickering bulb and the glow of a $10 desk lamp, he became something else. He became focused, controlled, ruthless about his mission. The bookshelf made from stacked milk crates held more than any classroom had given him. Textbooks on anatomy, pathophysiology, chemistry, and emergency medicine. Most were borrowed from the hospital library or found in donation bins at the Goodwill store. Some had notes scribbled in the margins by students long gone. Jamal devoured them. He'd downloaded free MCAT prep apps to his cracked phone. He'd bookmarked medical YouTube channels, transcribed surgeries from online lectures, and practiced terminology until the words rolled off his tongue like they belonged there. He had flashcards taped to the walls. He quizzed himself while brushing his teeth. He'd even turned his closet door into a makeshift whiteboard using dry erase markers he'd stolen from an abandoned school supply closet. There were no tutors, no prep programs, no summer science camps. Just Jamal. And the dark. At night, when the power flickered off, which it often did, he pulled out his flashlight and kept reading. His mom would sometimes peek in around midnight, still in her hospital scrubs, her feet aching from hours on concrete floors. "Baby, you should sleep," she'd whisper. "I will," he'd lie. "You've got school in the morning." "I know." She never pushed. She'd just shake her head with a tired smile and whisper, "You keep going like this, you gon' be operating on me one day." He'd smile back, but deep inside he wasn't so sure anymore. Not since the school had suspended him. Not since he became the punchline of a place that had never wanted him to win. Still, every time doubt crept in, he'd look at the line of textbooks on his windowsill and ask himself, if not me, then who? One rainy Thursday, after school, Jamal came home soaked to the bone, his hoodie clinging to him, his shoes squelching on the cracked linoleum. His backpack sagged with water and knowledge. He peeled it open, pulled out a sopping folder, and tried to dry off his biology notes with a hairdryer. It was during this small moment, a perfect symbol of his life, trying to salvage something soaked and fragile, that the knock came. 3 firm raps on the door. Not the hurried knock of a friend or neighbor. Not the rhythmic beat of someone selling something. He opened it cautiously, chain still latched. A tall man in a charcoal trench coat stood outside. Late 40s, salt and pepper beard, glasses, polished shoes that didn't belong in this building. He looked like he belonged in a courtroom, or a boardroom. Not in front of a moldy apartment in East Charleston. "Jamal Carter?" the man asked. Jamal didn't answer. The man reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. It had a dark blue emblem on the front, a crest Jamal didn't recognize. "I was asked to deliver this by hand," the man said. "They don't normally do this, but your name came across someone's desk. They were moved." Jamal undid the chain slowly, his eyes locked on the envelope. "Who are you?" he asked. "Just a courier, but I suggest you open it." Jamal took it. The envelope was heavy. He turned it over. The return address read, Pre-Med Scholars Initiative,
Howard University College of Medicine,
Washington, D.C. His hands trembled. "Have a good evening, Mr. Carter," the man said, tipping his head before disappearing down the hallway, shoes clicking against the tile. Jamal closed the door, heart pounding. He dropped the backpack to the floor, ignored the wet textbooks, and tore open the seal. Inside was a formal letter on thick paper. Elegant script. "Dear Mr. Carter, your name was submitted by a member of the Charleston Medical Volunteer Program. After reviewing your academic record, service hours, and recommendations, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a finalist for the Pre-Med Scholars Summer Residency at Howard University College of Medicine. This is a competitive, fully funded program designed to support underrepresented students of exceptional promise who plan to pursue careers in medicine. Please confirm your participation by the deadline enclosed. We look forward to supporting your journey. Sincerely, Dr. Lorraine Vickers, Director Pre-Med Scholars Initiative. Jamal sat back in the chair, stunned. This wasn't just a program. It was a lifeline, an escape, a validation he hadn't dared to hope for. He flipped through the packet: full scholarship, summer housing, lab access, mentorship, MCAT prep, medical school, shadowing. He couldn't breathe. "Ma," he called out, voice cracking. Denise rushed in from the kitchen, still holding the sponge. "What's wrong?" He held up the letter with shaking hands. She took it, read the first lines, and slowly sat down on the bed. Her eyes watered. "Is this real?" "It's real," he whispered. Denise looked at her son, a mixture of pride and disbelief washing over her face. "I told you," she said softly. "You just needed someone to see you, to really see you." Jamal nodded, but his mind was already racing. Who had submitted his name? He hadn't applied. He hadn't even known the program existed. And then it hit him. The hospital. The volunteer coordinator, Miss Bailey. A woman who had once found Jamal in the waiting area, reading a cardiology textbook while waiting for his shift. She'd asked why he was reading something so advanced. "I just want to be ready," he had replied. He remembered now, her smile, her nod, her scribbling something into her planner that day. Jamal stood up, fire returning to his chest. They tried to shut him out, laugh him down, write him off. But somewhere, someone had seen through it. And now, a door had opened. Still, something inside him whispered caution. Because nothing in his life came without a catch. The next morning, Jamal received an email from the school. Someone had anonymously accused him of academic dishonesty, and the administration was launching an investigation. Jamal stared at the email, on the cracked screen of his old HP laptop. The subject line burned: "Academic Integrity Violation Inquiry." The words twisted his gut. Beneath them, the email outlined that a formal investigation had been opened, based on an anonymous accusation. Allegedly, his essays and assignments showed signs of unoriginal work, and possible outside assistance. No names, no evidence, just suspicion, once again weaponized. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he didn't respond. Not yet, not while his throat was burning with fury and disbelief. This was retaliation. He could feel it. The timing was too perfect. Just 2 days after receiving the Howard University pre-med packet. It was happening again, this time quieter, more calculated. No graffiti on lockers, no laughing teachers, just emails sent behind closed doors, policies dressed up as process, and a whisper campaign to cast doubt. But Jamal had been here before, bruised by words, pushed down by policy, and dismissed with professional smiles. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He forwarded the email to Ms. Monroe, the retired principal-turned-advocate, who had taken up his case. Within the hour, she replied, "Don't respond. Let me handle this. Keep your eyes forward." But keeping his eyes forward wasn't easy when they were constantly looking over his shoulder. At school, students acted like nothing had happened. Ms. Latham barely acknowledged him when he returned from suspension, but her smirk when handing him a quiz sheet said everything. The rumors had already sunk in. "Got someone writing your essays now, Doc?" a kid muttered as they passed him in the hallway. Jamal didn't answer. He'd stopped answering. Instead, he poured himself deeper into the application for the Howard program. It wasn't guaranteed. Nothing was. But tucked inside the welcome packet had been a second envelope, unopened until now, labeled simply National Equity Scholars, Nominee Opportunity. He peeled it open slowly, almost afraid of what was inside. The letter read, "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You have been unofficially shortlisted by a faculty member at Howard University for the 2025 National Equity Scholars Grant, a competitive, full-ride scholarship awarded to 5 students annually across the United States who demonstrate academic excellence in the face of systemic adversity. The final stage requires submission of a personal essay, 2 new academic recommendations, and proof of financial hardship. Deadline, April 10, 11:59 p.m. EST." Jamal blinked twice. His fingers trembled. This wasn't just another scholarship. This was the one. The Equity Scholars Grant wasn't publicized widely. It was designed to find the hidden gems, the students who slipped through the cracks, who didn't have prep courses, legacy admissions, or glowing private school transcripts. It was for students like Jamal. It was also notorious for being ruthlessly competitive. Thousands applied. 5 won. And Jamal was one of the final 10. But there was a catch. He had 5 days to submit everything. 5 days to rewrite his life. He exhaled shakily and began pulling everything he had. Old report cards, volunteer certificates, his mother's hospital pay stubs. He called Ms. Bailey, his coordinator at the hospital. She agreed to write one of his letters. He asked Mr. Walker, the former biology teacher, who had once quit Lincoln High after watching students like Jamal get chewed up by the system. He agreed instantly. But the hardest part was the essay. The prompt was brutal in its simplicity. Why you? He stared at the blinking cursor for hours. Deleted the first draft. And the second. Finally, sometime around 2 a.m., with rain tapping against the window pane and the dim desk lamp casting shadows, Jamal began to write.
Why me?
Because I wasn't supposed to want this. I wasn't supposed to read medical journals under flashlight when the lights got cut. I wasn't supposed to survive a school that labeled me a distraction instead of a future. I wasn't supposed to hear my teacher laugh when I said the word surgeon and still believe in myself anyway. Why me? Because every time I wanted to give up, I saw my mother come home in hospital scrubs, her feet bleeding, her back bent, but her smile still strong. She never stopped believing in me. I can't afford to stop now. Why me? Because I know what pain looks like. I know what being invisible feels like. And I want to be the kind of doctor who never forgets that. Ever. He finished it in tears, not from sadness but from something more dangerous. He submitted the application 2 hours before the deadline, heart racing like he'd just performed surgery on his own future. Then he waited. The days dragged on, each morning heavier than the last. At school, the whispers continued. The plagiarism accusation hadn't gone away, but hadn't moved forward either. Suspended in limbo. Strategic. A teacher who used to nod at him in the halls now avoided eye contact. One guidance counselor said, Jamal, we just want to make sure you're not putting too much pressure on yourself. Maybe explore some trade options too. But Denise Carter wouldn't let him spiral. Every night she brought him tea and whispered, don't let him shrink you, baby. They always come for the tall ones. 3 weeks passed. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Jamal came home to find a large white envelope resting on the floor under the mail slot. He froze. He knew that size. It was from Howard. He picked it up slowly, heart thudding like a drumbeat in his chest. For a full minute he just held it, afraid to open it. He knew this moment would divide his life in two. Before and after. He ripped it open. Inside was a single folded letter and a glossy certificate. He unfolded the letter, hands trembling. Dear Mr. Carter, it is our great pleasure to inform you that you have been selected as one of 5 recipients of the 2025 National Equity Scholars Grant. Your story moved every member of our review committee. Your academic perseverance, personal character, and service to your community embody the exact kind of future physician we aim to nurture. This award includes full tuition, housing, mentorship, and a guaranteed pre-med track into the Howard University College of Medicine. Welcome to the next chapter of your journey. Jamal didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. He sat down slowly, the paper still in his hands, staring at it as if it might vanish. When Denise walked in 10 minutes later, she found him still there, frozen. Baby? She asked. He looked up, eyes glassy. I got it, he whispered. I got it. She dropped the grocery bag and grabbed him tight, the paper crushed between them. She sobbed into his shoulder, whispering prayers she hadn't said out loud in years. And for a few brief moments, Jamal allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had broken through. But the next morning, as he walked into school with his head high for the first time in months, Ms. Latham was waiting outside the main office. She was smiling. Jamal, she said sweetly, the board would like to see you. Now. Jamal stepped into the conference room, and sitting at the table was a familiar face, and in front of them was a sealed folder with his name stamped across the front in red. The walls at Howard Medical weren't moldy, the floors didn't creak, the ceiling lights didn't flicker when it rained, and nobody laughed when Jamal Carter introduced himself as a future trauma surgeon. But that didn't mean he was safe. Howard was sanctuary, but not shelter. It gave him access. It gave him hope. It gave him tools. But it didn't change the fact that medicine was still a world built on ancient codes, silent ones. Ones that watched how you walked, how you talked, how you wore your white coat, how often you smiled. And for Jamal, a black freshman in a sea of polished privilege, it meant learning a new language. one that punished confidence as arrogance and silence as incompetence. He noticed it in orientation, where classmates introduced themselves with Ivy League pedigrees and family lineages thick with physicians. Last names that meant something. Legacies. One girl mentioned she'd shadowed her father in the OR since she was 9. Jamal had mopped those OR floors. He introduced himself simply, Jamal Carter, Charleston, pre-med track trauma focus, and watched the invisible wall rise. It wasn't overt. Not at first. No slurs. No mocking laughs like Ms. Latham. These were future doctors, after all. They wore respect like a badge. But it came through in other ways. Who got picked first for group projects? Who professors lingered with after class? Whose questions got answered? Whose didn't? He sat in the front. Always. He studied obsessively. And still, when he raised his hand to answer questions in class, professors sometimes paused, looking past him until another hand shot up. But Jamal was used to being looked past. He made the anatomy lab his battleground. Quiet, precise, tireless. While others posted selfies in scrubs, or complained about how gross the cadavers were, Jamal stayed late, studying every nerve, every muscle group. He wanted to be better, not just to survive, but to leave no room for doubt. On day 17, Professor Lin, head of the first-year diagnostics lab, paired students for their first patient simulations. Jamal was placed with Trevor Malone, a second-generation med student from Connecticut, whose father ran a private orthopedic practice. Trevor barely spoke during their first few sessions. He answered questions for the both of them before Jamal could open his mouth. When Jamal tried to offer input, Trevor would interrupt with, "Yeah, but let's not overcomplicate it." Eventually, Jamal stopped speaking during labs altogether. It wasn't worth the correction. During one simulation, their standardized patient, a paid actor pretending to suffer from chest pain, asked Jamal a direct question about symptoms. Jamal answered confidently. Afterwards, Trevor pulled him aside. "FYI," he said with a patronizing smile. "In group sessions, it's better if the lead speaks. Otherwise it gets confusing." Jamal nodded, jaw tight. He'd read the lab manual front to back. There was no lead. But he understood what Trevor meant. The next week, Jamal volunteered for a shadow shift at a real hospital. The first clinical rotation of the term. He showed up early, shoes polished, white coat crisp, stethoscope already slung around his neck. His attending was Dr. Albright, a tall, wiry man with a Harvard tie clip and a clipboard always half full. He welcomed Jamal with a distracted nod and said, "Stick close, don't touch anything." They rounded to pediatrics first. Room 4-1, a 6-year-old girl with asthma complication. Her mother hovered protectively by the bed. "Vitals stable," Dr. Albright said, flipping through the chart. "We'll check on you again in a few." As he walked out, he gestured toward Jamal. "Take a look at her file. Don't get in the way." Jamal nodded and stayed behind for a few minutes, quietly reviewing the child's chart on the clipboard left outside the room. He stood near the hallway, didn't enter the room, didn't say a word to the patient or her mother. But as he turned to walk away, the mother caught his eye through the glass. She didn't smile. She reached for her phone. Later that afternoon, as Jamal sat in the break room jotting notes, a nurse stepped in. "Mr. Carter." "Yes?" "Dr. Albright wants to see you." He followed the nurse back to the admin wing. Albright stood behind a desk, arms crossed, beside a woman Jamal didn't recognize. "Hospital administration. There's been a concern raised," the administrator said, "from a patient's parent." Jamal blinked. "Concern?" "She says you reviewed her daughter's medical information without consent. She claims you accessed her daughter's chart unsupervised." Jamal frowned. "I was told to look at the chart. I didn't enter the room. I didn't say anything. It was part of rounds." Dr. Albright scratched his chin. "I don't recall specifically instructing you to handle the chart. I said stay close. Maybe it was a miscommunication." Jamal's stomach turned. "I didn't break protocol," he said carefully. "It was in the hallway, on the board." The administrator's expression remained flat. "Regardless, we filed a formal incident report. You'll receive an email outlining next steps. That's all for now." The door shut behind him. Jamal stood in the hallway, chest heaving. He could hear voices inside continuing without him. He wasn't invited to defend himself. When the email came that evening, it was clinical and cold. Subject line: clinical conduct review, preliminary notice. It didn't accuse him directly, but it opened a file. Trevor heard about it within a day. Jamal knew he did, because he suddenly started speaking to him again, this time with veiled sympathy. Tough break, he said. But you know, these environments are delicate. Families get nervous. You get it, right? Jamal didn't respond. He wanted to scream. Instead, he buried himself deeper into his books. But something had shifted. He started noticing other things. Professors who used to greet him now looked over him. A TA subtly moved his quiz into the review pile. A classmate asked him, "So are they watching you now?" And just like that, he wasn't just a student. He was a liability. A question mark. But Jamal refused to fold. He called Clarissa Monroe that night. "They're coming for you in new clothes," she said. Voice calm but fierce. "Not like Latham. They're smarter now. But we're smarter too. Is there anything I can do? Keep records. Everything. Times. Names. Emails. You don't fight racism head-on in a lab coat. You bleed it out with truth." Jamal started logging everything. Dates, interactions, microaggressions, moments of dismissal. He even bought a small notebook and wrote down quotes that disturbed him. One entry read, "Why are you so intense?" Profanders after I asked a detailed question about trauma triage. Another, "You don't have to prove anything to us. Relax." Classmate, after I aced a practice exam. They wanted him to shrink. He wouldn't. Then came the final blow. A letter arrived in his school mailbox in a sealed envelope. It was from the hospital. From the Office of Clinical Standards. To Mr. Jamal Carter. Due to the concern raised during your recent pediatric rotation, your clinical privileges have been temporarily suspended pending further review. This is not a disciplinary action, but a procedural measure to protect patient trust and ensure proper supervision. You may continue coursework but will not be permitted in clinical settings until the matter is resolved. Jamal sat on the bench outside the lecture hall, the paper trembling in his hand. They had pulled him from the one place he felt alive. Not because of anything he did, but because of how he looked doing it. As Jamal stared at the letter, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "They did the same to me. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m. Library basement. The library basement didn't look like part of a prestigious medical institution. The walls were concrete, stained with age and silence. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows between rows of outdated journals and forgotten anatomy models. Jamal arrived just before 9 p.m., heart thudding beneath his hoodie, the letter from the hospital still tucked in his pocket like a weight he couldn't drop. He wasn't sure what to expect. The message had been vague. "They did the same to me. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m., library basement." He stood near the dusty archives section, listening to the hum of the building. For a moment it felt like a prank, or worse, a trap. Then a soft voice broke the silence. "Carter?" Jamal turned. A woman stood at the edge of the stacks. Black, early 30s, braided hair tucked into a bun, white coat draped over her arm. She had tired eyes, and a lanyard that read, "Dr. Amara Brooks, Internal Medicine. I'm the one who messaged you," she said. He stepped forward slowly. "You're a doctor?" "Barely," she said with a sad smirk. "Been on thin ice since my residency. I finished top of my class, passed my boards, but somehow I'm still always a risk to someone." Jamal nodded, instantly understanding. "They pulled you from clinicals?" she asked. "Yeah." Said it wasn't disciplinary. Just policy. "They said the same to me," Amara said. "Back in 2017. Pediatrics. White parents complained I made them uncomfortable. Never mind that I saved their son's life." She led him deeper into the basement, toward a corner table covered in printed documents. "There's a pattern," she said. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Jamal leaned over the table. It was a makeshift archive: incident reports, complaint summaries, anonymous testimonies, data graphs highlighting the disproportionate scrutiny placed on Black medical students and residents. Over and over, the same phrases appeared: inappropriate demeanor, too aggressive, unprofessional tone, lack of cultural fit. "They never say Black," she said, "but they don't have to." Jamal's hands trembled as he picked up one of the papers. It was a redacted complaint against a former student, but he could read between the lines. "How many of us are there?" he asked. "Enough to make noise, not enough to be safe while doing it." That's what this was about. Safety. Silence. "I've stayed quiet too long," Amara admitted. "I've watched good people leave the profession because of whispers. I thought I could survive by keeping my head down." She looked at him now, eyes steady. But maybe you're the one who doesn't. Jamal swallowed hard. The idea of fighting back filled him with equal parts fire and fear. If I speak up, he said, they'll come harder. They'll say I'm playing the race card. They'll label me angry or ungrateful. They already are, she said gently. So the only thing left is to decide what kind of noise you want to make. That night, Jamal didn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his dorm room. The walls felt tighter, the air heavier. Every word from that conversation buzzed in his mind. His hands moved almost on instinct. He opened his laptop, pulled up a blank document, and began writing a formal statement. To the Office of Clinical Affairs. My name is Jamal Carter, first-year medical student and recipient of the National Equity Scholars Grant. I am writing to formally respond to the incident report filed during my pediatric rotation. He laid out every detail, the attending's instructions, the location of the chart, the hallway interaction, the lack of protocol violation. He included dates, times, and emails. But then he did something more. He added context. He attached his previous evaluations, his GPA, his volunteer hours, his record of service. He explained the pattern, how he had experienced a consistent undercurrent of doubt and scrutiny since the first day, how Black students, like himself, were held to invisible standards no one else seemed to acknowledge. Then he did something even riskier. He seeded the Diversity and Inclusion Board, and a civil rights legal liaison affiliated with Clarissa Monroe's advocacy office. He hit send at 2:11 and immediately felt like vomiting. The next morning was a blur of anxiety. He went to class, but every hallway felt longer. Every glance from faculty felt suspicious. He couldn't tell who had seen the email, who was talking, who was waiting to strike. Then at 1:17 p.m., his phone buzzed. Subject line: response required. Preliminary inquiry initiated. Mr. Carter, we have received your formal response. In light of the information provided, we are opening an internal review into the complaint and all associated conduct. You will be contacted shortly to meet with the Clinical Standards Committee. This process is confidential and non-retaliatory. Respectfully, Dr. Marin Ra, Dean of Academic Integrity. Jamal exhaled slowly. It wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was motion. That same evening, a second email arrived from a med student he didn't know. Then another. And another. They said things like, I read what you wrote. I've been there too. They made me feel like I didn't belong. Thank you for saying it out loud. Some weren't Black. Some were women. Some were queer. All had stories. All were silent. Until now. But not everyone was supportive. In lab the next day, Jamal noticed his project folder missing from the tray. I saw it this morning, his lab partner said with a shrug. Maybe someone moved it. He found it later in the trash can near the vending machines. During his pharmacology lecture, a slide about emotional resilience flashed on the projector. The professor chuckled and said, some of us just aren't built for pressure. His eyes landed on Jamal for a moment too long. The walls were closing in. But Jamal didn't flinch. He knew they were watching now. So he made sure to be precise, impeccable, unflappable. Every answer he gave was perfect. Every form he filed had backups. He even started recording notes on his phone after meetings, just in case. Then came the meeting. He walked into the Clinical Standards Committee conference room alone. Dr. Marin Ross sat at the head of the table. A Black woman in her 50s. Gray streaks through her locks. Sharp eyes that seemed to cut through nonsense. Mr. Carter, she said without smiling. Please sit. He did. To her left sat two faculty members he didn't recognize. To her right was the administrator who'd filed the incident notice. We've reviewed your response, Dr. Ross began. And we've reviewed the attending physician's notes. There are discrepancies. Jamal kept his voice calm. Yes, ma'am. That's why I wrote the letter. We don't open investigations lightly, she continued. But your record is clean. Your evaluations are excellent. The attending in question has had similar complaints. Jamal's eyes widened. That part hadn't been in the email. Ross glanced at her notes. And you've CC'd outside advocacy representatives. Yes, he said. Because I needed protection and visibility. Wise, she said, surprising him. Then she leaned forward. Let me be clear, Mr. Carter. This institution can be slow to change, but not immovable. I'm not promising miracles. I'm promising due process. You've been heard. The hearing adjourned. As he stepped into the hallway, legs still trembling, his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a student. It wasn't a dean. It was a text from his mother. "They're calling again. Channel 5 wants to talk about your case. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Jamal stared at the screen. His words had sparked an investigation, but now his name was becoming public. Just as Jamal started typing his reply, a white envelope slid under his dorm door, marked "Confidential Faculty Review," with a handwritten note that read, "You should have stayed quiet." Jamal Carter sat in the back row of the lecture hall, where the acoustics were sharpest and distractions fewest. It was never about being seen. Visibility had long proven dangerous, but about listening, observing, mastering. He took notes in silence, annotated faster than the professor could change slides, and never once interrupted class to flaunt an opinion. He didn't need to. His scores spoke louder than any speech he could give. By the end of his second semester, Jamal was ranking at the top of every course: physiology, biochemistry, anatomy, pharmacology. He had aced clinical scenario exams, passed simulation labs with flawless precision, and submitted a diagnostics case study that faculty members quietly passed around, but never publicly acknowledged. And still no honors. No name on the leaderboard slides during lecture. No emails of praise. No spotlights. He watched his peers, those who had half his clinical instinct, get invited to panels, recommended for research assistantships, tapped for early mentorships. Trevor Malone, the same student who once tried to control their lab assignments, had already been introduced to an elite surgery program through faculty connection. Jamal's name was left off the circulation list. It wasn't an accident, it was a pattern. Each time he asked about opportunities, the responses were vague. "There's only so much room in the program this year. We're prioritizing students with stronger institutional support. You should focus on your strengths, maybe something less competitive than trauma." He didn't argue. He just worked harder. He woke up before dawn, ran anatomy mnemonics in his head while brushing his teeth, studied during lunch, while others scrolled through social media, and stayed late in the library long after the cleaning crews passed through. At night, he replayed his clinical simulations, his fingers twitching with imaginary sutures. Every mistake became a post-it note on his dorm wall. His excellence wasn't loud. It wasn't packaged in confidence or privilege. It lived in silence, sharpened in the dark. But it was real. The file kept by Clarissa Monroe and Dr. Amara Brooks was growing. They were quietly documenting every bypass, every unfair review, every overlooked submission. Jamal's name was now tied to a growing movement. A case study in how systemic racism evolved from blatant rejection into bureaucratic omission. Still, Jamal never let the bitterness take root. He kept his face calm, his voice even, and his energy focused. Because he had one goal: the upcoming pre-residency immersion internship. Offered by a coalition of 3 hospitals and one of the top trauma centers in the country, the internship was the crown jewel. Only 5 students would be chosen from across the entire region. The process was blind. Essays, transcripts, evaluations. No names, just numbers. This was it. The shot he needed. No politics, no favoritism, just raw merit. Jamal's application was airtight. His essay: sharp, human, compelling. His transcript: unmatched. His clinical performance scores: top percentile. His recommendation letters: glowing, especially the one written by Dr. Ross herself, after his integrity hearing concluded with full exoneration. In a fair world, Jamal was a lock. But he'd learned by now, fairness was fragile. One Friday morning, 2 days before decisions were to be announced, Jamal walked into the main student lounge to print off a lab form. It was mostly empty, except for Trevor and 2 of his friends huddled near the vending machines, laughing low. "Hey Carter," Trevor called. "Ready for the internship results? Heard the trauma center's real picky this year." Jamal didn't respond. Trevor walked over, a soda can in hand. Too casual. "Gotta admit," he said, "your scores are solid, but programs like that look for the full package. You know, fit, culture, someone who represents the institution." Jamal kept typing. "Then again," Trevor continued, "I heard someone might have flagged an inconsistency in your volunteer hour log. Something about a missing signature." Jamal turned slowly. "What?" Trevor just smiled. "Nothing serious. Probably just a clerical error. But you know how these programs are about integrity." Jamal's heart sank. He knew that smile. He'd seen it in every passive-aggressive dismissal, every email that said "unfortunately," every excuse disguised as policy. By the time he reached his dorm, An email was waiting. Subject: internship application. Secondary review. Note: Dear Mr. Carter, as part of our standard verification process, we are currently reviewing an item in your application related to volunteer documentation. This does not constitute a disqualification. However, a formal response is required within 20. Please submit a signed affidavit from your supervising coordinator. Respectfully, Dr. Elaine Porter, Director, Pre-Residency Immersion Program. Jamal knew what this meant. A delay. A stall. A shadow of doubt. Just enough to disqualify him before the final round. He immediately called Miss Bailey, the coordinator from Charleston Medical, who oversaw his hospital volunteer work. She picked up, out of breath. Jamal? Everything okay? I need your signature. On an affidavit. They're saying something's missing. That's not possible. I submitted your hours myself. But I'll resend everything. Don't worry. She had the document to him within the hour. But Jamal still felt the chill. The next day he turned in the new paperwork, and waited. Waited through lectures. Waited through rounds. Waited through another day of being ignored while lesser students were celebrated. Then, just after midnight, another email arrived. Subject: internship decision. Jamal opened it. Breath froze. Dear Mr. Carter, thank you for your application to the 2025 Pre-Residency Immersion Program. After thorough review, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of our 5 regional recipients. Your placement will be at Eastern Regional Trauma Center, beginning June 1st. Welcome. He didn't smile. He couldn't. It didn't feel like a win. Not fully. Not yet. Because excellence had spoken. But someone had still tried to silence it. And someone might try again. He printed the letter, folded it carefully, taped it to the back of his closet door. A quiet reminder. You made it. No matter who tried to stop you. Still, that Monday morning, just as he began planning for his rotation, he received another anonymous message in his inbox. No subject. No sender. Just one sentence. You really think they're going to let you through the front door? That night, Jamal's clinical supervisor pulled him aside. One of the internship directors had quietly requested a reassessment of his psychological readiness for trauma care. Jamal Carter had learned how to navigate landmines in silence. Every semester brought new ones, masked as policy, protocol, or passive-aggressive praise. But nothing could have prepared him for the betrayal that came from inside his own circle. It began innocently enough. After the internship announcement, Jamal found himself cautiously embraced by a few classmates who had once ignored him. Praise was clipped but present. Handshakes came with qualifiers. Congrats, man, someone said. Guess the system works sometime. Jamal had smiled politely, knowing full well it wasn't the system that worked. It was the cracks he'd clawed his way through. Among the new supporters was Daniel Reed, a second-year med student, white, affable, well-connected, the type of student faculty loved, charming without being too loud, assertive without being rude, and just progressive enough to call out racism when it was safely performative. Daniel had approached Jamal in the cafeteria the day after the internship was confirmed. You made it, he said, sliding into the chair across from Jamal. Eastern Regional's no joke. Appreciate it, Jamal said cautiously. I've been watching your journey, Daniel continued, sipping his overpriced smoothie. You've got grit. I respect that. That respect turned into casual chats, then shared study notes, then group meetups. Daniel introduced Jamal to a few surgical fellows he knew from his own rotation. He sent him tips on trauma casebooks and even offered to share his clinical prep materials, notes that Daniel claimed were passed down from legends. For the first time, Jamal felt like he had a potential ally on the inside. He let his guard down. 2 weeks before his trauma internship was set to begin, Daniel invited Jamal to collaborate on a mock emergency triage case for their advanced diagnostic seminar. The task: develop a scenario for a simulated trauma drill, and lead the class through diagnosis and treatment steps. Jamal was hesitant. He had enough on his plate, but Daniel was persuasive. Let's show them what real collaboration looks like, he said. Your clinical instincts, my scripting, will blow them away. Jamal agreed. They met 3 times. Daniel took notes while Jamal walked him through detailed trauma protocol. They planned everything: vitals, patient background, symptom progression, complications, intervention. Jamal's fingerprints were all over it. The logic, the detail, the language. The night before the seminar, Daniel texted him. Hey man, Prof wants the submission early. I'll polish and upload. We're good. Jamal trusted him. The next morning, the professor began class with an announcement. Today's scenario submission comes from Daniel Reed. Exceptional work. One of the most detailed trauma drills I've ever reviewed. Jamal blinked. There was no mention of collaboration. No second name. Just Daniel. Jamal tried to keep his expression calm as Daniel led the class through his scenario. Every line, every protocol, word for word, what they had built together. When it ended, the class applauded.
The professor patted Daniel on the back. This level of work? You're headed for chief residency.
Jamal stayed seated, silent, burning. After class, he confronted him in the hallway. You really submitted that without my name. Daniel smiled, too casually. Wasn't intentional. I figured you were busy with internship prep. I made a few edits, and when the form asked for author, I just filled it out. You mean you filled it out? Jamal said. You erased me. Daniel shrugged. It's just one case. Chill. But it didn't end there. 2 days later, Jamal was called into the academic review office. A woman named Dr. Riley, composed cold, sat behind a long oak desk. Mr. Carter, we've received a report of academic misconduct, she said. Jamal's stomach dropped. What kind of misconduct? A plagiarism concern, she said, sliding a printed packet toward him. Your final pharmacology paper shares substantial language with an earlier submission filed last year by a Daniel Reed. Jamal stared at the document. It was his paper, his words, his formatting. But somehow, someone had accessed an old file Daniel submitted during his first year, and now it looked like Jamal had copied him. Jamal couldn't breathe. I didn't plagiarize anything, he said slowly. I've never even seen his paper. Dr. Riley nodded, like she'd heard it all before. We're not making assumptions yet. But this is serious. A review panel will be formed. You'll be temporarily pulled from your internship rotation until the investigation concludes. Jamal wanted to scream, to break something. Instead, he said, I want to submit my original draft file. Metadata, timestamps, anything. You're welcome to. But please understand, accusations of this nature can result in expulsion. Expulsion. The word echoed through him like a gavel. As he left the office, his phone buzzed. One new voicemail. Unknown number. He hesitated, then hit play. A familiar voice crackled through the static. Carter. It's Trevor. Jamal froze. I know we're not cool, but you need to listen. Daniel did the same thing to someone else last year. Stole their research summary, passed it off as his. It got buried. But I have the file, the original one. Yours isn't the first name he's tried to bury. Don't ask how I got your number. Just check your email. I'm sending it now. The voicemail ended. Jamal stared at his screen in disbelief. Trevor Malone, his longtime rival, the same smug student who once tried to derail his lab rotation, was now helping him. He opened his email. There it was. A PDF comparison of Daniel Reed's past submission and another student's original, identical language, identical structure. Buried, but time-stamped. Jamal downloaded the file and forwarded it to Clarissa Monroe immediately. She responded within minutes. This is your leverage. You're not just defending yourself now. You're about to expose a pattern. But that night, as Jamal prepared his formal response packet, he noticed something else. His laptop was acting strange. Files were missing. Folders were renamed. A digital signature tracking file, a tool Clarissa had installed for security, had been disabled. Someone had accessed his drive. Jamal's heart pounded. He checked the login logs. Remote login, 1:47 a.m. Dorm IP address. He was being watched. As Jamal scrambled to protect what was left of his work, his screen went black, and a single message appeared in white text. One more step, and you lose everything. Jamal Carter hadn't slept in 31 hours. Between preparing for his academic review hearing, backing up his stolen files, and reporting the digital breach to Clarissa Monroe's legal team, his body was running purely on caffeine and adrenaline. His hands trembled from exhaustion, but his mind was razor sharp. Because today he stepped into the trauma wing of Eastern Regional, for the first time, not as a student in simulation, not as a volunteer, but as a trauma internship participant. This was the room where futures were rewritten. The halls buzzed with low murmurs of nurses, beeping monitors, squeaking wheels of gurneys. Everything moved quickly but precisely, and yet Jamal could feel it, the way eyes followed him a second too long. The quiet pause when he introduced himself, the subtle questioning of whether he belonged. His badge read, Intern. trauma rotation. His coat was clean, his notes memorized, and still he was treated like he'd borrowed both.
Dr. Heller, the lead attending. A stiff, bearded man with a dry tone looked Jamal up and down during morning rounds. You're the Howard scholar, right?
Yes, sir. You're early. I'm ready. Good. Stay out of the way. This ward doesn't slow down for interns. Jamal nodded. He had no intention of slowing anything down. For the next 6 hours, he did exactly what he was told. Observe, assist on paperwork, hold retractors, track vitals, no cutting, no orders, just shadowing. Then, at 4:22 p.m., everything changed. A call came over the intercom. Code blue. Pediatric trauma. ER room 7. Incoming ETA. 2 minutes. Every hallway froze, then erupted. Nurses ran. Doors slammed. Carts rolled. Jamal followed the team, barely keeping pace. His sneakers squeaked across the polished floors as they burst into ER room 7, just as the paramedics wheeled in a small girl, maybe 9 or 10. Blood streaked across her forehead, her arm twisted unnaturally, lips pale. Car accident, the paramedic shouted. No seatbelt. Lost consciousness en route. Dr. Heller snapped into action. Vitals. BP dropping, a nurse called. 80 over 50. She's crashing, someone said. We need a line now. Heller turned to his resident. Michaels. Where's the vein? The resident hesitated. Too long. Jamal stepped forward. Basilic, medial to the biceps tendon, he said. She's losing volume. Start fluids wide open. Everyone turned. Heller's eyes narrowed. Did I ask you? No, sir, Jamal said. But you're running out of time. The moment hung in the air, like a wire pulled tight. Then Heller growled. Get the line. If you miss, you're done. Jamal didn't miss. He moved quickly, hand steady despite the tremble in his chest. Needle in. Flush. Clamp. Fluids in. The monitor beeped higher. BP climbing. Jamal looked up. She's stabilizing. The nurse nodded. He's right. No one said a word for a moment. Then Heller barked. Clear the room. Parents are arriving. The team scattered. Outside the ER doors, Jamal stood quietly, the rush still surging through him like electricity. He had acted on instinct, on knowledge, on every quiet hour he'd spent preparing in the shadows. And he had saved her. 15 minutes later, the girl's parents arrived, distraught, panicked. Her mother collapsed into a nurse's arms. Her father demanded answers. Who was with her? Who kept her alive? Dr. Heller started to speak, then hesitated. He looked at Jamal. For a moment, Jamal thought he'd do what so many others had done. Take credit. Move on. Rewrite the moment. Instead, Heller said, the intern. The father's eyes snapped to Jamal. You? Jamal straightened his shoulders. Yes, sir. You're just a student. I'm in the trauma immersion program. I was trained for this scenario. The father looked at him again, confused, unsure. His wife stepped forward. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking. She's alive because of you. Jamal nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached out, grabbed his hand and whispered, Thank you. Jamal exhaled for the first time in an hour. It was small, but it was something. Later that evening, in the break room, Dr. Heller approached him. You were right to act, he said. Don't get used to it. Jamal didn't smile. I won't. Keep it clean. No heroics. We don't need lawsuits. Yes, sir. As the shift ended, Jamal changed out of his coat, his hands still buzzing from adrenaline. He walked through the hospital's rear exit, into the cooling evening air. For the first time in weeks, he felt validated not by grades or speeches but by action. He'd earned something no one could take. But as he approached his dorm, a man in a security uniform stopped him.
Mr. Carter?
Yes. The guard handed him a folded note. No sender. Dropped off by courier. Jamal unfolded the page. Typed. One sentence. You're getting too comfortable. Moments later, his phone buzzed. An alert from the hospital. His badge access had been suspended pending review of professional boundaries. Someone had filed a complaint against him. Jamal Carter didn't sleep the night after saving the little girl. He sat at the edge of his dorm bed, the folded note still on the desk beside him. You're getting too comfortable. He read it over and over, until the words lost meaning. It didn't matter who wrote it. It didn't matter why. The message was clear. His success wasn't just being noticed, it was being monitored. By morning, his badge access to Eastern Regional's trauma ward had been suspended. Pending review. The same hospital that had applauded him silently, behind closed doors, now claimed a complaint had been filed. Something about overstepping intern boundaries and engaging directly with family without faculty clearance. But the report wasn't signed. No names, no specific rule cited. Just enough bureaucracy to slow him down. Just enough doubt to suggest he'd overreached. Again, he forwarded the suspension notice to Clarissa Monroe and Dr. Amara Brooks, who had both become his quiet lifelines through the fire. Clarissa's reply came quickly. They're testing your threshold. Don't flinch. Amara was more blunt. They only call it insubordination when it's us doing the saving. Jamal didn't respond. Instead, he requested a meeting with the hospital's director of residency programs, Dr. Miriam Strauss, a woman known for being clinical, unsentimental, and ferociously fair. Her office smelled like paper and lemon disinfectant. Degrees lined the walls, all framed with the same exact wood. "You were the intern on the Hawkins case," she said flatly when he entered. "Yes, ma'am." "You started the line and stabilized the child." "I did." "And you spoke to the family without clearance?" "I answered their question. They asked who saved their daughter." She stared at him for a long moment. "And you said it was you?" "I said it was me." Dr. Strauss leaned back in her chair. "Do you know how many interns we have, Mr. Carter?"
Yes, ma'am.
"Do you know how many make the same decision and get it wrong?" "I didn't get it wrong." "That's not the point," she said, voice like a scalpel. "The system doesn't reward unapproved excellence. It punishes unpredictability." Jamal held her gaze. If I had waited for someone else to act, she might not have made it. Dr. Strauss tapped her pen twice, then nodded. "You're not wrong, but you made a lot of people uncomfortable." He stayed silent. "Uncomfortable people talk," she said, "but so do results." She stood, walked to her filing cabinet, and pulled a document. "This is a temporary clearance, supervised access only. You'll return to trauma for the next 2 weeks under direct observation. Make no mistakes." He took the paper. "Thank you." She didn't smile. "Don't thank me. Prove me right." Those 2 weeks tested every inch of Jamal's discipline. Eyes followed him everywhere. Nurses, attendings, even admin staff. His cases were reviewed twice, his notes double-checked. At rounds he was introduced last. Patients were told he was in training, even when he was the only one who recognized the issue. And still, he performed flawlessly. No missed vitals, no procedural errors, no emotional outbursts. When patients asked who he was, he introduced himself with one word, "Doctor," even if it made some of them hesitate. "Are you the real one?" one man asked, his wrist already cuffed with an IV. Jamal had inserted perfectly. "I'm the one keeping you alive," Jamal said, quietly, and over time things began to shift. Not overnight, not publicly, but in whispers. A nurse pulled him aside. "You caught a bleed in bed 6. That's twice you've caught something we missed." A surgical resident bumped his shoulder in passing. "Trauma teams talking about you." Quietly, even Dr. Heller, who had once dismissed him, nodded during a chart review. No words, just acknowledgement. But perhaps the biggest shift came when Dr. Strauss emailed him directly. "I'd like to discuss your future." They met in her office again. This time she didn't ask if he understood the system. She asked what kind of doctor he wanted to be. "Trauma surgeon," he said. She nodded slowly. "Will support your residency application. Be warned, it gets harder. They smile in your face and vote against you in private." "I've survived worse," Jamal said. She raised an eyebrow. "Not yet. But still, this was movement. It was something real." That night, Jamal walked back through the halls of the trauma unit with his badge restored, his name now whispered with cautious respect. He had climbed the cliff. Scarred, yes, but not broken. He had made it. Almost. At 8:47 p.m. that same evening, Jamal was reviewing charts at his desk when the ER dispatch line crackled through his radio. Code red. Cardiac arrest. 54-year-old female. Unconscious at residence. CPR initiated. No response. ETA 4 minutes. Nothing unusual, until the address was read aloud. Jamal froze. 129 Whitaker Lane. He knew that address. His stomach dropped. He stood so fast his chair nearly toppled. He ran to the dispatch desk. "Repeat that address." The nurse looked confused but complied. 129 Whitaker Lane. Jamal's voice was tight. Is there a name? She flipped through the sheet. Latham. Victoria Latham. Jamal's world tilted. Ms. Latham. His former teacher. The one who laughed when he said he wanted to be a doctor. The one who suspended him, mocked him, tried to erase him. She was coming in, unresponsive, near death. And he was the doctor on call. As the ambulance doors swung open, Jamal stood frozen face to face with the woman who tried to destroy his future, now depending on him to save her life. The ambulance backed into the ER bay under a wash of flashing red lights. Rain spat from the sky, turning the black pavement slick and reflective. Inside Trauma Bay 2, Jamal Carter stood still, hands gloved, heart hammering in his chest as the gurney wheeled in. This wasn't just another patient. It was her. Victoria Latham. The woman who once laughed in front of an entire classroom when he said he wanted to be a doctor. The woman who smirked as she wrote the suspension slip that nearly derailed his future. The woman who once made Jamal feel like his dreams were an inside joke, one he wasn't in on. Now, she lay unconscious on the stretcher, her face pale and waxy, gray roots peeking from the hairline of a once polished bun. Her mouth was slightly open, neck veins bulging. Her chest rose in shallow, struggling bursts beneath the oxygen mask. Jamal didn't speak. He didn't move. His mind raced with 100 images at once. His old desk in room 207, the way her voice would dip an octave when addressing him, the way she refused to call on him, unless it was to correct him. The paramedics rattled off vitals as they rolled her in. 54-year-old female. Found unresponsive on kitchen floor. No known DNR. No next of kin on scene. CPR administered on site. BP plummeting. Pulse faint. Possible MI, massive anterior infarct. We got 10 minutes max. Get her to Trauma Bay 2. Hook up the pads, Dr. Heller ordered from behind. Jamal, you assisting or what? The name snapped him back to reality. Yes, sir. His voice was clipped, mechanical. He stepped forward, glancing only once at her lifeless face, as they cut away her blouse and attached the defibrillator pads. Her skin was colder than expected. VTAC, a nurse shouted. She's crashing again. Charge him to 200. Clear. The body jumped. Once. Twice. Flatline. Jamal stared at the screen. Every part of him was trained to act. But something primal in him hesitated. Not because he wanted her to die. That wasn't who he was. But because this was the universe handing him the most impossible test of his entire life. The woman who told him he would never be a doctor was dying on the table. And he was the doctor on call. Jamal, Heller barked. Sternum compressions now. He moved on instinct, positioning his hands and delivering steady, precise compressions. His face remained emotionless, but inside memories flooded every pulse he forced into her chest. Her mocking voice, the red marker on his locker, the lab suspension, the way his mother cried quietly in the hallway after the school board hearing. BP returning slow but rising. The nurse confirmed. Good. Push another epi, Heller ordered. Pushing, Jamal confirmed, slipping the needle in with practiced control. He wasn't a med student anymore. He wasn't the dreamer sitting in a back row, begging to be seen. He was in charge now. After 15 harrowing minutes, her vitals stabilized. She was alive. Barely. They rolled her into ICU for monitoring. The team dispersed in silence. Jamal stood alone by the trauma bay door, sweat beading at the back of his neck despite the room's chill. He couldn't leave yet. Not until he made sense of what had just happened. He followed the gurney into the ICU wing, where nurses began hooking her up to full monitors. A breathing tube was placed. IV lines threaded through both arms. Her face was slightly turned toward him. Eyes still closed, lips slightly parted. The laugh lines that once framed her cruelty were deeper now, folded with age. He stepped forward and stared at her. You don't remember me, he said quietly, his voice low and even. But I remember you.
No movement.
I was the black kid you embarrassed in front of a whole classroom for wanting to wear this coat. His fingers tugged at his white coat gently. I was the one you made an example of. The one you said was dreaming too big. The one you tried to shrink. He paused. But I saved your life. He didn't say it for credit. He didn't need thanks. He just wanted her to hear it. Somewhere in the haze of unconsciousness. The truth. The full circle. As he turned to leave, he noticed something. A folder resting on the table near her feet. Her personal effects. He hesitated, then glanced around. The nurses were busy. He reached for it. Inside was her ID, cell phone, a few bills, and a small leather-bound notebook, worn frayed at the corners. Jamal flipped it open out of habit. The first page hit him like a gut punch. Student watch list, motivational concerns. Below it, names, notes, class years, coded language. Carter, J, unrealistic ambition, disruptive confidence, needs soft redirection. His hands went cold. This wasn't just about him. Page after page held notes on black and brown students, those who dared to raise their hands too high or speak too boldly. Tanya M. over-identifies with academic performance. Isaac D. talks back too often when corrected. Not med school material. Luis G. strong-willed, better suited for trade programs. Jamal flipped through quickly, horrified. This was no notebook. It was a roadmap of quiet sabotage, a career of veiled academic harm. He wanted to scream. He wanted to march the notebook into the dean's office. But instead he gently tucked it back into the folder. Not yet. This couldn't be buried. Not quietly. Not like so many others had been. He needed proof. He needed leverage. He needed this to be done right. He walked back out into the hallway. The air felt heavier now, colder. He passed Dr. Heller on the way out. "You good?" Heller asked, eyeing him. "Yeah," Jamal said, masking everything behind his eyes. "She's stable. Good work." A pause. "You sure you've never done this before?" Jamal smirked faintly. "I've been preparing for it my whole life." He kept walking, back through the ward, back toward the locker room. He unbuttoned his coat slowly, hands still trembling. He'd saved the life of the woman who once tried to ruin his. But she hadn't changed. She had continued the work, behind desks, behind doors, and now he had the evidence. But he also knew what it would mean to expose it. It wouldn't just rock her reputation. It could shake the entire institution. Just as Jamal reached for his phone to call Clarissa and tell her what he'd found, her number lit up on his screen first, along with a single message: "Do not speak. They know you found the notebook." The phone trembled in Jamal's hand as he stared at the message. "Do not speak. They know you found the notebook." Clarissa didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. In her world, brevity was protection. Precision was survival. Jamal lowered the phone slowly. Outside the ICU, the hospital pulsed with fluorescent calm. Patients murmured behind beige curtains. Nurses walked with practiced urgency. And behind double-paned glass, Victoria Latham, the woman who once tried to erase him, lay silent, heart still laboring, life hanging in the balance. He had saved her once already. But it wasn't enough. Her condition had worsened overnight. Acute myocardial infarction, followed by pericardial effusion. Her heart was failing, and she needed surgery. The attending cardiothoracic surgeon assigned to the case, Dr. Desai, had been paged 3 times but was delayed on an emergency transport. The on-call rotation shifted quickly. Surgeons were reassigned. Residents shuffled. Within minutes, Jamal found himself at the top of the available list. He wasn't the attending, but he was licensed, and he was trained, and with proper supervision, he could lead. Still, protocol hung over everything like a ceiling made of glass. That's when Dr. Miriam Strauss appeared in the OR bay. She pulled him aside, face unreadable. "They want you to step back," she said flatly. Jamal didn't ask who they were. He already knew. "But Desai's still en route," he said. "She won't make it unless we go in now. They're saying you're too close to the patient. She's not family. She's not even a friend. But she's personal," Strauss said. "They know what she did to you. Someone's worried about optics." He scoffed under his breath. "I don't care how it looks. I care that she's dying." Strauss folded her arms. "You're qualified. I know. You're ready. I know." She met his eyes. "Then go save her. But do it clean. And if anything goes wrong, don't expect anyone to cover you." Jamal nodded once. The prep began. Inside the surgical suite, the lights blazed cold. Machines beeped in tight rhythms. Nurses moved with seamless coordination. Jamal stepped into the room like a conductor entering the pit. Ms. Latham was prepped on the table, intubated, sedated, a sheet covering everything below her sternum. Her chart glowed from the digital display, hemodynamically unstable. Pericardial tamponade suspected. Her heart was drowning in its own fluid. Dr. Alan Chu, his supervising cardiologist, stood at his side. "You've done this in simulation, but this time she won't wake up if you get it wrong." Jamal's hands moved to his gloves. Then I won't get it wrong. The nurse handed him the scalpel. He looked down at her chest. The woman who once questioned if he could even pass biology, now unconscious under the weight of a future she never imagined he'd reach. Incision at midline, he said quietly. Dr. Chu nodded. The first cut was clean. He moved carefully, layer by layer. Sternotomy followed. The rib cage opened with a clean crack. The pericardium was visibly distended, tight with fluid pressing against the heart. Tamponade confirmed, Chu said. Jamal inserted the suction catheter. Dark blood drained out slowly. The heart throbbed back to life, slightly freed. BP rising, the anesthesiologist said. Keep going. Jamal reached deeper. You need to relieve pressure from the anterior sac, Chu said. I see it. He maneuvered the scalpel with surgical grace, edging around the inflamed tissue. One wrong move, and she would bleed out. He could hear her breathing through the vent, shallow, unnatural. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, don't die on me. A pause. Then, scissors. The nurse handed them over. He cut into the sac. Fluid burst like a tide giving way. BP stabilizing. Heart rhythm regularizing. It was working. He began to close. Sutures. Clamps. Breath steady. Then it happened. The monitor screamed. BP crashing. V5. She's coding. Everything inside the room froze. Jamal looked down. There was no visible bleed. No rupture. The site was clean.
What happened? Chu asked.
Heart's twitching. Losing rhythm, the anesthesiologist said. Clear the tray, Chu shouted. Prep for internal shock. Jamal didn't wait. He reached for the paddles, his voice sharp, charging to. She can't take a full shock, the nurse said. She won't survive without it. He pressed the paddles to her open chest. Clear. Her body jerked.
Nothing.
Charging again. Jamal Chu warned. We don't know if it's electrical failure or myocardial rupture. If you hit it wrong, you'll destroy what's left. Jamal stared at the screen. The line was flat. She was dying. The woman who doubted his worth. The woman who labeled him disruptive and unrealistic. The woman who weaponized policy to kill black ambition in 100 students before him. And still Jamal Carter, the boy she humiliated, the intern she would have never chosen, was the only thing standing between her and the grave. He charged again. 25 joules. Internal. Chu's hand hovered at his shoulder. You sure? I'm the only one who's ever been sure. Clear, he shocked. Her body spasmed. The line blipped. Then steadied, pulse returning. BP climbing. Jamal sagged slightly, shoulders trembling. She was alive. For the second time. Because of him. The nurses resumed stitching. Dr. Chu clapped him gently on the shoulder. That was gutsy. Jamal didn't speak. He looked at her again. Sweat trickled down his brow. Her face was still pale, but the tension was gone. He'd gambled everything, and won. As the room cleared and the surgical staff filed out, Jamal peeled off his gloves slowly, walking toward the scrub sink. Every nerve in his body buzzed. But inside there was silence. The kind that comes after a storm. He turned off the faucet and looked at his reflection in the mirror. The boy in room 207 was gone. In his place was a man who had stood between life and death. Not once, but twice. For someone who once tried to kill his dream. He had chosen humanity. He had chosen medicine. He had chosen something bigger than revenge. He stepped out of the OR and into the hallway, just as a nurse rushed toward him, breathless. Dr. Carter, what's wrong? There's a call for you. From ICU. The patient's next of kin finally called back. Their en route. Jamal frowned. She didn't have listed family. The nurse shook her head. That's the thing. It's not family. It's a man claiming to be her former colleague. He asked if the lead doctor on the case was Jamal Carter. Jamal's blood went cold. Who? But before the nurse could answer, his phone buzzed again. A blocked number. He answered. A smooth, familiar voice crackled through. I told you before, Carter. You should have stayed quiet. But now, everyone's watching. Jamal turned slowly and saw a security team approaching, with a clipboard and a sealed envelope marked immediate administrative review, pending internal ethics investigation. Victoria Latham stirred for the first time in 48 hours. The ICU lights remained dim, the blinds drawn, her vitals stable now, but shallow. A low heart rate monitor beeped steadily, signaling that for now she was still alive. A nurse stood quietly at the foot of her bed, adjusting the IV lines, unaware that behind the bandages and oxygen mask, the woman was slowly slipping back into consciousness. Jamal Carter sat on the far side of the ICU observation bay, his chair angled just enough to see her through the glass. He hadn't spoken to her since the surgery. He hadn't needed to. The procedure had been textbook, but the layers beneath it, the weight, the history were anything but. In his hands rested the sealed envelope, marked immediate administrative review, delivered by hospital security just hours earlier. Inside were 3 allegations: breach of confidentiality, unprofessional conduct, and unauthorized retention of personal patient property. They knew about the notebook. Not the details. Not yet, but enough to trigger a formal investigation. Enough to silence him. Enough to possibly end him. Yet Jamal didn't flinch. He had read the accusations, understood the strategy. A classic preemptive strike. If Latham survived, and that notebook ever reached the wrong desk, she could bring others down with her. People in administration. People with power. The only way to neutralize that threat: discredit the messenger before he speaks. Disqualify him, quietly, but not before she woke up. He wasn't leaving until she did. He needed her to see. He needed her to know that the boys she mocked in front of 30 classmates, the ones she labeled delusional, unfocused, too ambitious for his own good, had not only made it, but had saved her life. Twice. And now, because of that decision, he might lose his career. At exactly 4:03 p.m., her eyelids fluttered. A slow, disoriented blink. The nurse leaned in quickly. "Miss Latham, can you hear me?" Her mouth twitched. Then a whisper, barely audible. "You're at Eastern Regional Medical. You had a cardiac event. Do you remember anything?" She blinked again, once. Then her eyes drifted toward the glass. Jamal remained seated, still, watching. Something in her expression changed. The nurse followed her gaze. "That's Dr. Carter. He's one of the residents who helped with your surgery." Victoria's eyes didn't leave his. The nurse turned. "Would you like to speak to him?" A faint nod. The nurse left the room, gently motioning Jamal forward. He rose slowly, every step echoing louder in his head than in the hallway. When he reached the bedside, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stood there, arms folded across his coat, watching her struggle to place everything. Finally, her lips parted. "You..." Jamal said nothing. Her voice was rough, faint. "You were my student." He didn't nod, just stared. Her eyes narrowed, trying to cut through the fog. "Carter, Jamal Carter." Still no response. The monitor beeped steadily between them. She looked away for a moment, then back again. "They said, you saved me." He tilted his head slightly. "Is that hard to believe?" She blinked, slowly. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. Jamal's jaw tightened. "You weren't wrong. You were deliberate." She flinched. That stung. "You didn't misjudge me," he continued. "You tried to break me. You laughed in my face. You labeled me a problem before I even had a chance." "I was doing my job," she said weakly. "No. You were protecting your version of who gets to belong." She looked away. He stepped closer. "I found your notebook." That made her freeze. "I saw the names, the notes, the way you buried kids with language like behavioral issues and unrealistic goals." Her throat twitched. "You didn't just hurt me," he said. "You architected failure for dozens of students who looked like me, who dared to dream too loudly." She began. "It wasn't personal. It was systemic," he corrected. "But you were the hand pulling the trigger." Silence hung like humidity between them. He could see it now, regret beginning to swim behind her eyes. But it was thin, too thin to stand on. "You'll survive this," he said. "But I might not." She looked up sharply. "They're investigating me. Because I found your notebook. Because I touched the rot. Now they're moving to discredit me before I can speak. I never meant..." "Stop," he said quietly. "This isn't about what you meant. It's about what you did." Her eyes filled with something she hadn't shown in years. Fear. Not of death, but of exposure. Then something happened. Something Jamal didn't expect. Her hand twitched. She reached out frail, tentative, and grabbed his wrist. He froze. "You saved me," she said again, this time with something close to awe. "Even after everything I did to you. I didn't do it for you." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're not getting it." Silence. She held his wrist for a moment longer, then let go. Her next words came out like breath torn from stone. If I speak out, she said, they'll destroy me. They'll bury me. You already buried others, he replied. She looked up at him, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I can testify, she said slowly. If I give you the context, the names, the chain of pressure, will that be enough to stop them from destroying you? Jamal hesitated. He hadn't expected this, not from her. But now that she was offering it, was it a confession or a bargaining chip? Could he trust the person who once made his name synonymous with failure? Before he could answer, her monitor beeped sharply. Her heart rate spiked. A nurse rushed in. She's in distress. Step back, Dr. Carter. Jamal moved quickly, exiting the room as a team flooded in. Behind the glass, he watched as they adjusted her meds, soothed her panic, brought her numbers back down. But her eyes remained on him, burning, pleading, maybe for redemption, maybe for silence. He didn't know yet. As he walked back down the hallway, the sealed envelope from hospital admin tucked under his arm, he felt the weight of 100 decisions crashing into one moment. He could go public, expose everything, risk losing his license, his scholarship, his future, or he could leverage her confession, get ahead of the investigation, force a hearing. But either path came with a price. The question was, what kind of doctor did he want to be, and what kind of man? As Jamal entered the stairwell, his phone buzzed with a message from Clarissa. Meet me at the courthouse. They're filing a protective petition for you. And the notebook. 2 days after Victoria Latham woke up, Jamal Carter took the witness stand. It wasn't a courtroom, not in the legal sense. But the sterile meeting room on the 3rd floor of Eastern Regional might as well have been. Around the oval table sat hospital executives, legal counsel, and 3 members of the State Medical Review Board. A folded copy of the immediate administrative review sat unopened before them. Across from them sat Jamal, white coat removed, suit jacket slightly wrinkled from hours without sleep. He'd arrived straight from the trauma unit. Next to him, Clarissa Monroe laid out a thick packet. Inside, redacted pages from Ms. Latham's notebook, testimony from former students, anonymous statements from other staff, and a letter signed in shaky handwriting from Latham herself. I admit, the letter read, I participated in a pattern of silencing and suppressing black students through administrative gatekeeping and coded discipline practices. I knowingly advised peers and subordinates to mark students like Jamal Carter as problematic or unrealistic to limit their access to advanced tracks. I did this with full knowledge of how the system would respond to those descriptors. A quiet storm of truth. The letter had been notarized that morning. Clarissa slid it across the table, then met the eyes of the review board. This is not just about protecting one student's career, she said. This is about acknowledging that for every Jamal who fights through it, there are dozens more who are erased before they even get a chance. The board remained silent. Then Jamal spoke. I never asked for this, he said. I didn't go digging for revenge. I wanted to become a doctor. That's it. I didn't expect to become a target, or a symbol. His voice didn't waver. But if being honest about what happened to me, and what continues to happen to others means losing everything I worked for, then at least I lose it with the truth. One of the board members, a black woman in her 60s, nodded slowly. She'd been silent the entire hearing. Now she leaned forward. I was you, she said. Once, in 1981, at a different hospital, wearing a different name tag. They tried to make me smaller too. She looked at the envelope before her and tore it in half. The investigation was closed. No sanctions, no suspension, no mark on Jamal Carter's record. The room exhaled. But redemption didn't end there. That evening, back in the IU, Victoria Latham sat upright for the first time. Jamal stood at the foot of her bed, coat back on, charts in hand. She looked older now, softer. Time had done what age alone never could. It humbled her. I heard, she said quietly, nodding toward the hallway. About the review. They dropped it. Because I confessed. No, Jamal corrected. Because the truth was undeniable. A pause. Then she said, You didn't have to save me. No, he replied. But I did. She looked at her hands. I don't expect forgiveness. You won't get it, he said. But you gave me something better. She looked up confused. Proof. Then almost impossibly she reached for a notepad beside her tray. I want to say something. To your patients. To your future students. To anyone who ever doubted someone because of where they came from. She wrote slowly.
Then handed him the sheet.
It was an apology. A real one. Not rehearsed. Not filtered through PR. Just raw truth. I'll read it at the hospital board meeting, she said. On record. They need to hear it from me. Jamal didn't respond. He didn't need to. Some things couldn't be repaired, but they could be exposed. And sometimes that was enough. The next week, Jamal returned to full surgical rotation. Word had spread, quietly at first. Then not so quietly. Medical journals picked up the story. Rising black surgeon saves former teacher who tried to derail his dream. Social media ran wild. Screenshots of Ms. Latham's apology went viral. The old classroom photo of Jamal, age 17, shy, serious, was placed side by side with a new one. Jamal in scrubs, standing over a trauma table, hands steady, eyes focused. Dr. Carter trended for 2 days. Requests for interviews poured in. He turned them down.
But one outlet, The Atlantic, published a feature titled The Boy Who Became the Surgeon, a story of racism, resistance and redemption. The piece chronicled not just Jamal's rise, but the hidden structures designed to keep students like him out.
Hospitals across the country began quietly reviewing their disciplinary pipelines. Latham, true to her word, testified at a city education hearing. She admitted everything. Named names, policies, tactics. It sparked an audit of 3 local schools. A year later, 2 teachers quietly resigned. But Jamal didn't watch any of it unfold on cable. He was too busy saving lives. Then, one morning, on the 1-year anniversary of the surgery, Jamal walked out of Eastern Regional through the front doors as sunlight cracked over the skyline. He took a breath, deep, steady. He didn't hear the footsteps until the microphone brushed past his shoulder. Dr. Carter? He turned. A woman stood there, petite, mid-30s, press badge clipped to her blouse. Behind her, a camera crew, local news. I'm Dana Wills, with Channel 9. Do you have a moment? Jamal glanced toward the street. Not really. Just one question, she said gently. One that's been circulating online. He paused. Go ahead. The camera light blinked red. If you could go back to that classroom, she said, to the day she laughed at you and say one sentence to that version of yourself, what would it be? Jamal smiled. Not smug. Not bitter. Just full. I'd say let them laugh. You'll be holding the scalpel one day. She nodded, visibly moved. Thank you, Dr. Carter. He turned and walked away, the sun washing across the back of his coat. As he crossed the street, his phone buzzed with a new email from Howard University Medical School. Subject, faculty offer, surgical mentorship director. How many brilliant futures have we silenced with doubt? How many Jamals were laughed at and never came back? If this story moved you, if you believe dreams shouldn't depend on skin color, type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.